Teachers of Reddit, what's your most memorable, oh boy, that student definitely isn't going places moment?
Story 1. I assigned students to do a group presentation of a story from mythology at the end of the school year. I told them they could choose Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Norse, or any other system they chose. 2 students chose a story from Norse mythology about Thor. They presented the story, which included characters like Loki, Captain America, Iron Man, etc., completely seriously. I spoke to them at the end of class, and they had no clue that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was not a part of Norse mythology. Story 2. Blatant and obvious low-effort plagiarism. Like, it's literally the first Google result if you search topic example essay, but they added their name in a different font and size, which should make it obvious at a glance as if the use of capitalization and punctuation wasn't a dead giveaway that they didn't write it. I had a student pull that last year, while his even dumber buddy didn't even put his name on it. Story 3. In the last few weeks before the AP exam, I give my classes a series of practice tests written by College Board to take in class under a time constraint to give them practice. One student, let's call him Bill, always tried to cheat in my class. I had gotten sick of putting in the effort to catch him, and it didn't matter because the entire point of the class was to prepare for the AP exam. Bill started off each test by staring at the page and answering 1 or 2 questions. Then, as always, he asked to go to the bathroom during the test. I let him go, and he took his phone, of course. He returns and frantically bubbles in the rest of the test and turns it in early. I have to hand it to him. Bill was great at memorizing letters for the answers of the practice tests, but he failed the AP exam. Story 4. My mom has taught special education for the last 12 or 13 years, so all of her students have been variously interesting. One of the more notable stories was about a boy who would just non-stop masturbate in class, not being loud or disruptive about it, just sitting there with his hand in his pocket jerking off through his pants. All class. Every class. He only ever stopped during lunch. They banned him from wearing sweatpants and wouldn't let him go to the bathroom alone, so he couldn't masturbate as easily. He just switched from jerking off to talking about his penis. He wasn't being abused or molested, as far as anyone knew. He just had a fixation. Don't know what ultimately happened to him. Story 5. This isn't really the kid's fault, more the parents. But my sister teaches in Hong Kong, generally 3, 4-year-olds. And she had this one kid called Enzo, if I remember right, kept acting out, completely ignoring my sister and her teaching assistant when they spoke to him, and doing badly in the classwork they're given. He also didn't speak, at all, and tended to play by himself. So my sister called in his parents to discuss it, voiced her concerns that there might be behavioral problems, maybe something deeper-seated. His parents then confided in her that it's probably not that. More that the kid didn't speak a lick of English, or Cantonese, that is, the 2 languages used in the school, and most of Hong Kong. They were both relatively affluent Italians, so they'd raised the kid speaking Italian and lied that he spoke English fluently so he could get admitted into the school, as it was a requirement that they have a basic understanding, if I recall correctly. My sister raised her concerns with the principal after she had the meeting, and they responded by just moving the kid to another class. She said she still sees him sitting alone during lunch breaks. I really feel for the kid, though. He's only young, and he's pretty much been alienated and won't learn properly because his parents are so dead set on shoving him into the most expensive school, assuming he'll learn well. Story 6. My mom was a substitute for 5th grade teachers. She told me how this one kid had so many anger issues. This kid would be sitting in his desk playing with Legos or something, then out of nowhere flip the desk and start punching the other kids while screaming at the top of his lungs. He also wasn't a small kid, and my mom isn't a big person, so when my mom tried to calm him down, he only got angrier and ripped a necklace off of her and tackled her to the floor, which was when 3 other grown men pulled the kid off of her. She got to go home early and get paid for the necklace that was broken. Story 7. Not a teacher, but a fellow classmate. The least intelligent member of my geography class stole my homework assignment from my bag and tried to hand it in as his own. I told the teacher after class, and she looked through the pile and said, "Don't worry." He didn't even attempt to remove my name from the paper. He basically just handed my homework in for me. Story 8. Okay. So, I had a student in middle school that couldn't read. That wasn't a huge deal. The kid had issues. Once he got angry at me and told me he was going to rip off my buttons. It may have been literal or figurative. Didn't matter. Remember, issues. It was my job to teach him to read. He should have already been in high school. He was 14 and in middle school. I worked individually with this kid every day. Finally, I just asked him what he was going to do for a living if he couldn't read and wouldn't try. He gave me a pretty standard answer. I'll play basketball or sell drugs. I should mention he was barely over 5 feet tall. I worried about him. He was my student for 2 years. Eventually, he moved on and I switched to high school. So 20 years later, I get curious. I remember most of my students, and this kid had a name that stood out a bit. I Google his name, hoping he won't be in prison. A lot of my former students are. I find him right away. He's a professional basketball player for Ukraine, retired now, but still so good for him. Made himself proud. Story 9. One of the fellas in my university first-year computer programming class stared at the wall at the same spot. The whole class, every class. He'd walk in on time, sit down, open his folder, and stare at the wall, and didn't ever take a note that I saw. At the end of the wall-staring duration of the class, he'd close his likely still blank folder, get up, and leave without a word. I see him from time to time at the grocery store collecting up the carts. I feel a little bad for whoever funded his education, but am pleased that he has a steady job. Story 10. The class was an applied math course for high schoolers, and we held a paper airplane design contest. The rule was that you could use anything on the table to make your airplane, and that the person who threw theirs the farthest down the hallway would win. The table had all manner of things on it: printer paper, construction paper, tape, rulers, compasses, toothpicks, duct tape, paper clips, masking tape, a stapler, and even Elmer's glue. Well, the class went to work, and for an hour designed some very interesting airplanes. Except for Tim. Tim sat quietly and chatted with his friends until about 30 seconds were left to build. Then he went up to the table, grabbed a few things, and sat back down to wait. When it came time to throw, it turned out that his airplane was a piece of paper wrapped around the stapler. While the lighter and more complex planes drifted to the side and landed early or hit the hallway walls, Tim's plane slammed straight into the door on the other end of the hall with a satisfying clunk. Tim's ridiculous creation beat everyone else out and won the contest easily, while technically obeying the rules of the competition. I hope that guy ends up working for NASA. Story 11. Used to teach English in Japan. Had a 12-year-old kid who would take off his socks and chew on his toenails in the middle of my lessons. Had a 4-year-old kid who would run at top speed toward the wall, throw himself into it, stumble around going, "Ouch!" for a few seconds, then do it all again, for an hour straight if we would let him. Had a 7-year-old who stripped off down to his underpants, then skipped around the room singing the Pokemon theme song for the whole class. Finally got him dressed again just as the lesson ended. He looked up at me and said in complete seriousness, "Sensei, I did a good job." Kids, man, they're weird. Story 12. Been a history teacher for 3 months and was teaching about the middle colonies and how it was the bread basket of America. The next day, as a warm-up, I ask what the bread basket is. She raised her hand, and without her even skipping a beat, starts going off about how I'm so dumb because it's called the chicken basket, where you get your tenders 2 sides, and it also comes with bread, but that isn't what it's called. This poor girl has a lot more stories. This one is the one that stands out to me the most. Other stories include wondering how Obama was the first black president because she thought Abraham Lincoln was black. Her reasoning behind it was that he was really tall. Granted, she's also black. Yeah. Along with that, I've had to explain that we did have color back then. She couldn't believe that people before the 1950s still had color, as only the TVs and photos were black and white. She constantly calls people cockatoos. 3 weeks ago, she asked which history I'm teaching. I honestly don't know if I really suck as a teacher or if it's her. Tori, 13. I once had a couple exchange students steal from my store when I was managing a Lids. They walked out of the store and we followed closely after them. We turned the corner, and they were stopped talking to their teacher. We patiently waited while they finished talking to the teacher, all while getting strange looks from him. He started to walk away, and we immediately tell the kids we need the hats they stole back, to which they replied, "We will give them back, but can we do it somewhere else? That's our teacher?" Like I was going to cut them a break after they stole. Teacher notices there is a problem, and comes back and absolutely laid into them, telling them they were going to go to jail and get expelled. We had no intent on pressing charges. They were only around 15 and stole 2 hats. But my God, if that teacher didn't put the fear of God into them. It turns out they were spoiled rich kids from another country who actually had the money to pay, but thought stealing would be cooler. We ended up getting a call from the school. They had to write an apology letter for us, and they had to do 30 hours of volunteer work for the charity of our choice. They threatened to shut down the school's exchange program because of them as well, but I never heard what came of it after that. Story 14. My sister is a teacher for a local school. Like a great many teachers, she's also responsible for a form group, in this case, a rowdy and rambunctious group of 15-year-olds she'd inherited from a newly retired teacher. Some kids stand out more than others, and not always for the right reasons. The epitome of that rule existed in my sister's form group. She had the misfortune to be called Xena by her Tumblr feminist mother, and Xena herself had followed firmly in her mother's footsteps. She was considered unpopular, and certainly the other kids were unfair and cruel, but she didn't help matters herself. My sister has told many stories of Xena, up to and including the time she spontaneously began speaking in an accent, which sounded like the bastard child of a Pakistani accent, Irish, and a speech impediment. The accent vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared over the course of the lunch hour. The time she claimed powers of clairvoyance and chemistry. The kid torching pencils with a Bunsen burner apparently never particularly cared if their great-aunt Doreen wanted to warn them of misfortune. The time she shaved her head and refused to wear her uniform because it was stifling her creativity. The John Cena meme was in full swing, and Xena had earned the nickname John Xena, owing to her buzz cut and unfortunate head shape. Kids would hum his theme tune upon seeing Xena in the school. A memo was sent around the faculty concerning the matter, but half of the staff were convinced that John Cena was a politician. My sister was running improvisation drills when Xena broke in with one of her prime stories. She was the daughter of a Mauritian man named Jonathan, she said. Her skin was the color of milk, smooth and pale, a man of great importance. She'd been born in Mauritius and swiftly smuggled over to the UK with her mother, born and raised in England, as a newborn. There was a beat of stunned, awkward silence, until a particular shit of a child screeched, "John Cena!" and slammed his mate's head into the desk. Story 15. I work with 3-year-olds. One was crying and pointing at another kid, so I asked what happened. She mostly speaks Spanish, but understands English, so I started asking her, "Are you hurt?" "Yes." "Did she hit you?" "Yes." "Did she kick you?" "Yes." Then the other child chimes in, "Nah, I didn't kick her, I just punched her in the face." Story 16. Oh boy. Just one? I teach high school, and every time I think I've heard the dumbest thing ever, it eventually gets topped. Here's a few shining examples. I had a student ask me why he didn't die in his sleep because he wasn't awake to remember to breathe. He had no idea what involuntary functions were and said he'd been concentrating on his breathing since he could remember, and every night he went to bed terrified that he was going to die. I had a student get caught stealing a TV from someone's house. The police literally showed up and caught him walking out the door, holding the TV. He couldn't understand how they found him so fast. Idiot was wearing an ankle bracelet and was on house arrest at the time. They knew the moment he left his yard. I had a student ask me what happened to Hitler after WW2. I very jokingly said that they turned him into a zombie and keep him in prison under the Pentagon. A few minutes later, this girl is bawling her eyeballs out. I ask her why, and between sobs, she claims she's terrified that he'll get out and do it again. The class was stunned. I was like, "Yo, zombies aren't real." "Yes, they are. I saw them on TV." This girl was 17. I had a girl proudly announce one day that her mama told her when she was little that she'd have big mammaries if she ate chicken, so she ate chicken every day, even though she didn't like it, but boy did it work. A young gentleman behind her calmly asked what would happen if she had eaten fish. I was teaching The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, and I was explaining that the name of the cat Pluto comes from the Roman name for the Greek god Hades. I went through our planets and told them what god each was named after and why. When I got done, this one kid accusingly announced to the class, "That's in Genesis. If you people read your Bible, you'd know this." Literally every time I teach Greek mythology, as a prelude to Oedipus, there's at least one kid, even in the honors classes, who asks me if this is real. I had a student that thought that our desks didn't rot because they were made out of wood and engaged in photosynthesis. He refused to believe that photosynthesis occurred in the leaves because his science teacher told him trees did it, and he flat out just wouldn't believe the truth. Best part is that the desks were a heavy plastic. I had a student who was not allowed to walk the halls by herself. She had to be escorted by a staff member at all times between classes because she'd slip into the bathroom and start ducking people, just ducking anyone. I had another female student who was paying guys $20 to let her blow them in the bathroom. One of my APs was like, I have no idea what I would do as a high school boy. She's ugly as sin, but holy shit, is that economical. This same girl later told me that she was working illegally, 15 years old, as a stripper at a particular club and gave me details about the back room that I happened to know were accurate and offered to bang me for free if I went there. I reported her to social services pretty much immediately after I got done being nauseated. I had another student pour an entire bottle of pills into a container of frosting and start chowing down on it in an attempt to commit suicide. Luckily, I realized what she was doing and was able to get medical attention. She did not die. I had a kid pull out a fifth of vodka and a porno mag in class. He was sent to the principal's office. He told the principal that we could keep the vodka but needed that porno mag back for later. I have a lot more of these stories. Story 17. Had a high school senior girl who didn't know how to add fractions tell me that it was a waste of time. This was a month before she had to take her SAT so she could apply to colleges. Side note, her mother would come in talking about getting her into top-tier schools and how bright she was. Story 18. I teach freshman and college-level writing. Every semester, I have one, so far, always male, student like this. He tells me that he's excellent at writing, and that this class is pretty much a formality for him. He tells me not to worry, he'll do me a favor and play nice in the class, unless it gets ridiculous, because he likes me as a teacher. He tells me about the book he's writing, and he tells me that he'll let me edit it for him when he gets finished. The other students hate him because he's always one-upping them in discussion. The papers he turns in never follow instructions, and on top of that, they're barely comprehensible. He's among the weakest writers in the class. His formatting is bizarre. He's then offended by any and all feedback. When I try to offer help, he assures me that it's actually a mistake that he's even taking my class, and that he was supposed to test out of it. He gets the grades he deserves, and moves down the line to the next teacher. Story 19. This happened to me just yesterday. My hair is usually strawberry blonde in the summer, but I dye it a darker red in the fall. When my kindergarten students came to class yesterday, they were all a bit unsure of the new color. Here's a real conversation. The broken English is because they're Korean children. Kid. Teacher. Head is why red. Me. Why is my hair red? I'm like a tree. I change colors in the fall. Kid. So, winter and no hair? I about died laughing. That's some logic for you.
Story 20. Not a teacher, but my high school class had a few people like this. I, of course, will not use their real names. Chad had a great F average in every class, was one of my class's biggest bullies, and was one of the most generally hated people in the whole school. He was constantly high in class, either on meth or weed. The thing that really did it in was when I overheard him and a couple of his friends talking while they smoked in the bathroom. His plan was to take 2 extra suitcases with him on his trip to Mexico and stuff them with cheap steroids from various dealers in Mexico. He claimed that the border guards never check stuff from white people. While this point can be argued, it is neither here nor there. Chad would be flying to Mexico. TSA would probably be curious why there are 2 suitcases filled with just pill bottles, not to mention going through customs with that. Brad was a general dumbass. My favorite quote from him was when he asked his friend, "Which are the uppers and which are the downers?" When the friend didn't know, Brad said, "Duck it," and took the whole handful. Physical science was an interesting class. I had both him and his friend as partners. I also had Brad in my English class. Our big project of the year was to make a model of something from the Elizabethan era and write a paper on it. Being the only non-druggie that would talk to him, I was forced to be his partner. I made an amazing model of a Spanish Armada galleon and wrote a great paper of all their victories up until the English defeated them. I say I did all that because he just sat there drooling due to the downers. Now, I didn't tell my teacher this. I'd rather just present what we did and get it over with. She was not about that. Brad and I got in front of the class. She gets up, pulls the outline out of my hand, tells me to sit, and tells Brad to give the presentation. You have not lived until you see a guy on 4 downers try to make a presentation on naval warfare. I did feel bad, though. He deserved the F, but not the public humiliation. He didn't learn from it, though. Something like this happened in every class I had him in up until late senior year. Danny was about as dumb as they come. I never really had many conversations with her, but one event stands out. It was my class's senior year. They released the rankings, and Danny was 150 out of 150. She took this as meaning she was top of the class. She went around and showed anyone that would listen. The worst part of this is, she has no learning disabilities or anything from holding her back. I, myself, have a few, and got to know everyone in my grade that has them as well. She was not one of those people. Someone finally had the nerve to tell her she was last in the class. I don't know the logic going through her head. She had a 1.5 GPA. They were being nice to let her graduate, as you require a 2.0 to graduate. I think she thought the rest of us were dumber than her. I did hear from her friends that she had a superiority complex, so maybe that is why. Ian was my friend. He sort of just stuck to my group and never went away. He thought we were all under him, and we all thought he was a dumbass. Classic high school bullshit. The past 3 I mentioned were bad, but Ian may be the worst. Wasted potential should be his middle name. He has the intelligence of someone that could make a 3.5 at the worst if he tried. He never tried. I don't mean guessing on tests or not studying. He would just skip class because he hated tests. The teachers would always try and let him make up the test, but he never did. He would always complain about how stupid school was and how he doesn't need it because he will study quantum physics in college. He dropped out of college his freshman year because he was not going to pay to be taught by people who are stupider than me. He graduated HS with a 1.7. His mom begged them to let him graduate because she couldn't afford to send him and his brother to school at the same time, and a 14 on the ACT. He was shocked that he didn't get into any good colleges. He now works on a farm, only talks to me when his better friends don't have drugs, and he generally hates life. Final story, because I want to end on a good note. Shelley was 16 when she got pregnant. The husband was part of the group that hangs out with Chad from the first story in this comment. She was a ditch to the highest degree, would only talk to those on her popularity status, and would bully people. She got pregnant and had the child. At my HS, they only allow you excused days when you are too pregnant to walk or are in labor. It was some bullshit. She had to come to school and get ridiculed every day. This changed her. She went from a ditch and middle ground student to a delightful person and a B student. She is a junior in college now, is raising the kid, and is now a god-tier human.
Story 21. Not a teacher, but a student. In 8th grade history, me and my 2 friends answered every question we could because every other student did not care. One day, this girl gets fed up and complained to the teacher that we were answering too many questions. The teacher decided to be fair and let her answer questions first, then have us answer if she got it wrong. The first question she was asked was, "What was the mother country of America?" Without missing a beat, she instantly says, "The Statue of Liberty." Story 22. Okay, so classmate here, and if my professor saw this, he'd be posting so in his stead, this one kid in my dendrology class. We will call him C. Now C started off okay in this class. He was weird and didn't get social cues. Well, C seemed fine, maybe just a little autistic. But later he started bragging he failed this class last semester. Not just saying it, but literally bragging that he failed. He thought it was a prize. Anyways, he continues to do so for the first few months or so. Throughout these months, he also comes up during field quizzes and asks, "Hey, what's this tree?" Or, "That was a completely obvious, it's not. Tree, right?" Then, we have Latin quizzes for the scientific names of these trees, and this ducker is sitting in front of the TA with his phone in his lap cheating on the quiz. Every single class. So mid-semester comes, and he gets an email from our professor saying he needs to drop this class or he will fail it. Good guy professor trying to save his grade. But he instead brags about it and decides, "Nah, I'll keep going. I've already failed once, it's fine." Well, he gets more emails and gets called out in class when he brags about getting 1 out of 15 trees right, and when he gets caught cheating, again. Anyways, end of semester comes, and he doesn't show up to the tree ID final, nor the written management final. I haven't seen him since. But I've seen his little car around town. It's hard to miss with the Resident Evil 4 logos all over it and the multiple bloody zombies on it. I don't think he is going anywhere in life. I feel sorry for him, but yet again he was given multiple chances to fix some problems, but decided not to, so I'm not sure I really care. Story 23. There was a 2nd grader at my school who was suspended for looking up porn on the school computers. That's right, a 2nd grader. Most recently, I had a girl whose mother worked at the school as a teacher's aide. The student, a 6th grader, would routinely skip classes and hang out with her mom in the hall, and she never did her work. Naturally, She was failing most of her classes. Well, suddenly, she was no longer failing her social studies class. It took all the 6th grade teachers talking to realize that the mother, who had access to her daughter's grades, had changed the grades so her daughter wasn't failing. It had to be her that did it, because none of the other teachers would do that, not even by accident. The way the system was, it had to be the mom. Mom was called into the administration's office and confronted, and naturally, she vehemently denied it, and for some reason, they didn't fire her. Still irritates me to no end. But yeah, any mother who would rather cheat her daughter's way to success than let her learn her lesson is just setting her child up for a lifetime of failure and dependency. Story 24, 2, both from my wife back when we were both teachers, both in her AP biology class, that time where a student overdosed on pills in class. She had bought them from a friend in class. A third friend tried to hide the drugs by dropping them out the window. The entire school is a 1-story building. That time where a student would poop in plastic bags and leave them on teachers' desks. Correction, this happened numerous times. Also because he had the right last name and went to the right church, he never got in trouble. Story 25 had an older college student, 28 or so years old, turn in 4 papers in a row that were directly copy/pasted from well-known academic articles. First one, he said he uploaded the wrong paper. Gave him 24 hours to turn in the right one. No new paper was submitted. Second one, he thinks he's cracked the code. This time he only turned in a hard copy and forgot to upload the assignment, so it didn't go through the plagiarism scanner. I told him he could go ahead and submit it now, no problem. Third one, he copy-pasted yet another article, format and all, and only replaced the author's name. During the plagiarism hearing, he tripled down and claimed he was the actual author of the paper, but had just changed his last name. He pointed to the fact that he and the author had the same first names as evidence of his authorship. The fourth one I saved as a memento, since he'd just been removed from the program. Story 26. Student had been taking notes furiously in my class, an honors math class, constantly for an entire semester. But she had been failing all the tests. I wanted to know why, because she had been taking so many notes throughout my class. I asked to look at her notes before the final in my class. She tried to dodge, but I finally got them. She hadn't been taking notes. She had written Piercing the Fold, Vanessa Kimball. I bought that book the following year. Pretty good, even though she failed the class. Story 27. Had a listening class, foreign language, and I saw this student take out his listening CD and look it over like it was the first time he had ever seen anything like it. Kind of like an ape with a shiny object would be the best way I could describe it. He just turned it over and over in his hands, and then, eventually, he started to bend it. I just remember thinking to myself, no, surely he'll stop. But he didn't, and eventually he bent the CD too far and the CD snapped, spraying the adjacent rows with shards of fiberglass or whatever CDs are made of. The noise startled nearly everyone in the class, too. I just stared at him, agog, for about 5 seconds before I kicked him out. Story 28, girl in the history department at my school. She's failed all of the core classes and is currently failing thesis. She's failed the introductory core class 4 times now. Her thesis this semester is about how white women were victimized during the civil rights movement. One of her topics is about the sexual favors that white women had to give to black men during the movement. Guess what website she cited? Pornhub, Story 29. I had a student who was failing from day one. This was 1 month into the new school year. I asked him why he wasn't turning in any work or even trying. He said he didn't care about graduating. This was a senior class, BTW. Most kids in my class try to pass because you have to pass it to graduate. So I go on to ask what his goal in life was. I couldn't outright say it to him, but if the kid is 18 and doesn't give a about graduating, I wondered why he didn't just drop out and go get a job. Anything. But waste away in a classroom doing nothing. He said his goal was to age out of school, which is 21. So you have this kid who doesn't want to graduate and doesn't want to get a job. I looked into him. He was labeled a sophomore at 18. His mom is a single mother who works as a nurse. He has an older brother who dropped out. Both kids stay with the mom, but don't try to get jobs, according to her. It's been 2 years since he had my class. I still see him in the cafeteria. This should be the year he achieves his goal. Story 30. Obligatory, not a teacher. I took an intensive 2-year software development course at a technical college. It was absolutely brutal. But those of us that survived were given a golden ticket to a better career, so it was worth it. The failure rate was close to 55%, mostly due to poor time management. But I will never forget Bizarro James. This poor kid would sit through class quietly, and then towards the end of at least one class a day, raise his hand to ask a question. I think he thought he had to ask a question, as if the teacher were keeping track. After a month or so, the teachers started to sigh when his hand went up. He would spend a solid 2 minutes on a breathless, rambling question that related to something we'd been taught and tested on weeks ago. After the first half of his question, his eyes would wander away from the teacher. I think he was talking to himself at that point. When he'd finish, there would be this moment of awkward silence as the teacher tried to process the free-flowing nonsense, and then just ask Bizarro James to see them after class. To my knowledge, he didn't. The first day of the second semester, I'm hanging out with a couple of guys from my class, talking about our marks from the first semester. Bizarro James shuffles up to us and asks what we're up to and then says, "Oh, you guys can see your marks? How did you do that?" He hadn't been aware you could look up your marks on the school website, so we go back to his table and pop open his laptop and I show him how to get to his marks. And we're looking down the low numbers, and he says, "What do those double W's mean?" To which I have to reply, "Those mean you failed, James. You're not allowed to be here anymore." He literally had no clue that he'd failed out of the first semester of the program. He just showed up to the second semester because that's what he thought he had to do. He packed up, and I never saw him again. I have no idea who thought it was a good idea to waste several $1,000s on sending him, but I hope he ended up in a better place. Story 31. I once watched a kid pepper spray himself in the face because his friend dared him to. I don't believe anyone was suspended for this incident because, ironically, the zero-tolerance policy doesn't apply to stupid. He is now 27, has impregnated at least 4 women, and is in and out of prison. Story 32. Unfortunately, I have a student who will most likely end up in prison. He's a serial groper and has inappropriately touched girls and women of all ages. He's done it to me, other teachers, and students. On top of that, he seems to be a pathological liar. It's at the point I'm scared to have him in my class, but I'm still doing the best I can by him. Story 33. I had a student who wouldn't turn in homework. When I would ask her why she didn't hand it in, she would say she did, but I must have lost it. Okay, doubtful, but maybe. A week later, she claimed the same story. Then, 2 weeks later, she tried to say I had a vendetta against her. I started asking her to hand her homework in personally, which she took as a personal attack. Oh Lord, she definitely had some issues, to the point I was worried she was going to get violent. She ended up getting suspended for fighting and was moved out of my class. Story 34. This kid was sweet as hell, but majorly dumb. The assignment was you inherited $1 million. A quarter had to be used to start a company. A quarter had to be for savings, investments. A quarter had to be to do whatever you wanted, and a quarter had to go to charity. You had to pick and back up reasonings for your decisions. So when it was Johnny's time to present, he clearly had decided to wing the assignment. Okay, Johnny, what about charity? Which charity did you choose to give a quarter to? Since I have $1 million, I decided to give more than a quarter to charity. I decided to give $10 to the, Blue Cross. The whole class fell out of their seats laughing. In case you're not American, Blue Cross is a for-profit insurance company he'd confused with the Red Cross. Story 35. I teach intro geology. I gave a lab quiz on the density and buoyancy lab we had done the week before. One of the questions asked, how are we able to build ships out of steel, considering that we measured steel to be more dense than water the week before? Almost the entire class gave variants of, the ocean is so big compared to a boat that all the water is able to keep the boat afloat, as an answer. I get some version of this answer every semester, but it really struck me because so many of them put it, and they weren't just copying each other. This school happens to be right next to a bay. So I took a large, uninteresting rock from the prep room and marched the students outside to the bay. I said, this rock is about 8 kilos and has a density of about 2.4 GCC, but according to your last test responses, the bay is so big that it should float. I threw the rock into the bay, and we all patiently waited for it to bob back up to the surface. Story 36. I am a teacher now, but this happened when I was in medical school. The only way we would ever be let off from attending something mandatory was if we had a sick leave from our hospital. So naturally, students got really good at lying about having diarrhea and migraines. But if you had too many of the same complaints, the system would flag it, and you'd have to complete a lengthier evaluation, and your parents/guardians would be notified. So one kid had the idea of faking appendicitis. He faked all the signs and symptoms so well, he was after all a medical student, they almost took him to surgery. Story 37. Teach computer science. At GCSE level, students have to learn 4 data types: integer, whole numbers; real, decimal numbers; Boolean, true or false; and string, a collection of characters. We had done 4 lessons on this because some of the group are a little less able. First thing, lesson 5, I ask a student who we shall call Aid to name the data type we would use for the number 47, correct answer integer. Aid answers by. Puzzled, I ask another student the same question. Integer, he replies. I go back to Aid for the answer, and he replies, by. I write integer on the whiteboard in 8-inch high letters, point to it, and ask the question again. Aid replies, by. I explain to him that the number 47 is a whole number, and all whole numbers can be stored as type integer. I ask what data type we would use for the number 47, and he replies, integer. Brilliant. I ask what data type we would use for the number 48, and the little darling replies, by. By now, the whole group was in tears, so we moved on. 1 year later, he still cannot identify even the simplest of data types.
Story 38. A student in my economics class started his final essay with this: We are all familiar with the country, Africa, yet at the same time we know little about them. All we know is that it is hot there, African Americans live there, and they are really poor. This begs the question, why is Africa that poor? It was just so jam-packed with stupid I had to stop grading for 24 hours. For the record, this was indeed a college student. Story 39. The one who would regularly hand in essays which were obviously copy-pasted. They didn't bother to change the font or color of paragraphs that were lifted from other websites. They never argued or shared their opinion, but would ask vague questions such as, "But what is the United States?" at the end of a lecture or tutorial that was about a legal decision. Story 40. As a GA teaching freshman English, I had a couple instances of cheating that left me speechless. First, my university uses an online plagiarism checker, and the students know this. With one student, over half of his essay was copied from a website. He looked genuinely shocked when I called him out on it, and then told me that his mother wrote the paper for him. I explained that his mother writing his paper was also cheating. Then he asked if he could get credit for the half that wasn't from a website. Another time, the students had to analyze a movie, showing how it used the hero's journey as plot structure. This was an easy assignment, seeing as how nearly every modern movie uses this structure. The student copied the Wikipedia summary of Aladdin word for word, and he denied doing it. He argued it was a coincidence that his entire essay was the exact same as Wikipedia's. Story 41. A student once threatened to sue me over the definition of the terms necessary and sufficient that he had mixed up in an exam. No biggie to mix them up. Actually, for a math major, it might be, but loudly threatening to sue me over an age-old textbook definition in an exam review session was kind of stupid. It did entertain all other students who were present. Another student once requested letters of recommendation for 5 of the top 10 master's programs in Europe, while being the second worst in his class of several hundred graduate. Story 42. I'm not a professor, but a fellow student I was paired with on 4th-year pharmacy school rotations was abysmally stupid. Our student room that 6 of us would do our assignments and projects in at the hospital was filled with a combination of meme posters created for our preceptor and motivational posters. Well, one poster was of whales breaching the ocean. Well, this one guy, we will call him M, blurts our one quiet afternoon, "That poster is so ducking stupid. Why are whales at the top of the water? They don't breathe air." Being bored myself, I indulge him and ask what he meant, to which he responded that whales were fish, and thus don't breathe air, they breathe water. This piqued everyone else's interest now, and we tell him that whales are mammals, just like dolphins are. He disagrees, saying that anything that swims in the water is a fish. Being the smartass that I can be sometimes, I ask him what a penguin is then. He tells us that penguins are just so stupid because they don't realize that they can fly and that all birds fly. I bring up ostriches as an example of a bird that doesn't fly, and he replies that those are just bird-like mammals. What are bats then? He replies that they are clearly birds. This goes round and around for about 15 minutes until another fellow pharmacy student asks him how he based basic biology or comparative anatomy.
both requirements for pharmacy school. He informs us that we are the idiots for actually taking the class, that he took them online and he just paid his sister, who was in med school at the time, to take the assignments and exams for him. It seems like he was trolling us, right? No. This connected so many dots for us. M was known for being just genuinely unintelligent and would ask the most basic questions, like what Benadryl is used for at the end of a lecture about allergy medication that just covered it. Our entire class of 200-ish future pharmacists were always puzzled by how he made it into our school. Story 43. Had lots of students from Saudi Arabia. They typically pushed boundaries, so I learned quickly to set boundaries and be firm/fair with everyone in the class. One guy didn't see the need to come to class much or do homework, and his grade suffered greatly. He came in one day and said, "I want a better grade. My family is the somethings." I don't remember the name. But apparently they were wealthy and well-respected. I didn't care, and I reminded him of his lack of effort. He was pissed, and he made some generic threats. But nothing specific I could call anyone about. I found out from the other Saudi students, most of which hated the guy, that he said "duck it" during the last week and went home without taking any finals. Maybe he was more arrogant, but I'd say he was also a dumbass. Story 44. I wouldn't say dumb, but definitely baffling and annoying. She had somehow gotten all the way to college, still believing that weirdly and creepily exaggerated coy little girl flirting would get her what she wanted, including with female faculty. It was cringy to see in action. Literally tilting her head to the side, playing with her hair, pivoting her leg back and forth mannerisms combined with semi-childish speech patterns while glancing up through her eyelashes. Definitely, I'm only talking to this one in front of witnesses territory. She told me that she was reading and studying every night and still not making progress on tests and needed help. I explained how to make written study materials to help her absorb information better. She said she'd done that and reviewed the materials regularly, but still wasn't seeing results. Genuinely concerned and puzzled, I asked her to bring me her materials next class period, and we'd go over them to make sure they were accurate and useful. She agreed. Next class period rolls around. She announces, with even more exaggerated mannerisms, that wouldn't you know it? She was so frustrated with her score on her last test, returned before our earlier conversation, that she'd thrown her study materials into the trash in a fit of anger, and they were all gone. Almost as if they had never existed. I looked her in the eye and said, "I think you should consider then that self-discipline may be playing a role in your grades in my class." She huffed and pouted in outrage, and I never saw her again. What makes me sad is that clearly someone, almost certainly her family, had taught her that these behaviors worked. No one sticks to a behavior that strongly unless she has had success with it. Story 45. Not a professor, but in my psychology class, there was this one girl that would ask questions every 3 minutes. Not the good questions either, like the ones where the teacher didn't full-on explain things or anything that would make the discussion better, just the type of dumb questions where the teacher had literally said what she was asking about 2 minutes ago. Anyways, we were viewing a map of cultural stereotypes, and in Mexico it said maids and gardeners. Which, okay, fair enough, it's just a stereotype, but this girl legit looks at it. Looks at the teacher and says, "That doesn't make any sense because Mexicans don't have gardens. How can they have gardeners?" As a student, I rolled my eyes. As a Mexican, I burst out laughing. JFC, I can't even be mad. I know she's not racist. She's just ignorant as hell. Story 46. I had a student when I was a TA who took the first quiz in my class, but I realized he wasn't on my roster. I told him this, but he insisted he was in my section. Soon he stopped coming to section altogether, but did insist on handing his exams and papers back to me in lecture. I eventually discovered he was supposed to be in my colleague's class, but never attended that either. After the final exam, which he handed in to me, he admitted to me that he had just realized he was in the other class, and had been confused because his roommate was in my class, but I guess it doesn't really matter since I didn't really show up anyway.
Story 47. Dumb isn't the correct term. Ignorant is more apt, and one of my 17-year-old homeschooled students was so ignorant it was scary. He read at a 2 end grade level and couldn't count past 20, and basic arithmetic was non-existent. Forget writing, as his hand spelling was also at a 2 end grade level. John's mother homeschooled him and finally gave up on it at age 16, 17, and enrolled him in our high school. My other students hated this sad kid, and he was always in fights, arguments with them. He threatened to kill one of his tormentors, and the guy laughed at him. I told this guy to cool it because unlike many kids, John meant it when he said he'd kill him.
Parents that elect to homeschool should be tested themselves, and periodic testing should be done on the student to see if they're progressing or not. Story 48. Had a single mom who came to class 3 times total. The last time was for the final. She leaned across the desk I was sitting at and asked me seductively if there was anything she could do to pass. I literally laughed and told her to get the duck away from me. Not only was she a fat slob, but she smelled like an ashtray and was one of the laziest students I'd ever had. She didn't even have a job. Still, she couldn't make it to class. We had free on-campus childcare, for fuck's sake. She failed and lost her financial aid. Story 49. I taught calculus in college. There are always several students who are terrible/lazy at the subject, but this term there was one who was really energetic about appearing to put in the effort in multiple different ways, but I'll focus on one. I told the class I'd give them extra credit for doing any of the advanced problems at the end of the chapters. This guy turns in elegant, concise, handwritten solutions for all of them. That'd be hard, even for me. He even knew how to do epsilon delta proofs. That's not something I taught. One of the problems involved a variable d and an epsilon delta argument. His proof contained the phrase, let epsilon d, which is utter nonsense not only in context, but in terms of an epsilon delta proof in general. It's supposed to be let epsilon 0, without exception. He was copying from an instructor's solution manual without knowing the meaning of the symbols. I suppose this isn't dumb so much as shameless. Story 50. The student that decided to plagiarize his entire 5-page paper. First, the whole class had been working on this paper for the entire semester, the only paper due. We had library days on how to cite things and find the information you needed, and they were going to be turning it in through an online paper checker that would give them feedback on plagiarism. They could revise and resubmit the paper as many times as they wanted, and this dipshit turned it in with every single thing but his name highlighted in neon colors. He then had the balls to say he didn't do anything wrong and trashed my desk because he failed. Story 51. Not a professor, but we had one dumb person in our senior design capstone class. Said dumb person was known for putting 0 effort into anything but somehow passed or got waivers to move on to certain classes. There are several below-the-desk style theories on this. No one wanted to group up with this person, but one unlucky group got stuck with them. They never showed up to class, scheduled shop lab time, or really did anything. They would try to pretend they were trying by saying, "Just tell me what you need me to do." Then immediately come up with some excuse why they couldn't do it. I have to go to work, I have to watch my dogs, my significant other is an asshole and I'm trying to leave them, etc. When time came to grade our partners, this person received a flat 0 from everyone. Even the stoner got a 2 out of 5 from his group. The person came back and was pissed they were given a 0 and started to scream they were going to get a lawyer. After a week, they broke down and tried guilt-tripping, asking what they could do to change it, and they would do anything. After a long discussion with the professor, he was more than happy to fail them, because he just enjoyed failing people. The person did show up on the final day and tried to cheat, but 0 people were willing to aid them in their quest. I'll never forget the look of despair when they got up to turn it in. Never saw them again, except for the Facebook post saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm graduating," with the family saying how proud they were. Then the work posts came showing their desk decorated with graduation stuff. We all laughed, saying they would never show their face. We were wrong. Graduation day rolls around, and they show up and walk. Then they met up with our group and tried to pretend to be friends so their parents could see. That was a fun 15 minutes of dropping hints that they didn't actually graduate. I still wonder if they finished school, and how they sold still being in school after graduating says. There's story 52. Not a professor, but a student. First day of classes for college in my human development class. So, as usual, the teacher used the first day to go over the syllabus. He had it projected onto the screen and gave us all a copy of it to follow along, which is more than what professors usually did. Anyways, he was going over it in quite a bit of detail to make sure we all understood what was expected of this class. Every person in that classroom understood what he was saying and how the syllabus worked, except for this one lady. She was middle-aged, maybe a little older, and for whatever reason, she had a question about everything about the syllabus, asking a question after every point the teacher made. She would even ask a question after the teacher just went over what she was asking. He would comply to answer her questions. But even he was getting annoyed, or would say that if she had a question to ask at the end of class. Everyone in the classroom was so annoyed by her that one of the students spoke up and said that she was wasting everyone else's time in class for asking questions that the professor literally had answered before she asked, or it's in the syllabus, and she needs to read it before asking. The lady looked so surprised and offended, and then looked at the teacher as if expecting him to say something. He just shrugged and said, "He's right," and went back to the syllabus. She shut up after that, and we never saw her after that first day. Now, I don't like to make assumptions that people are dumb because they just might be confused about something or have something going on. At the same time, though, how stupid can you be to just keep asking questions that are clearly being explained to you and then get offended when someone calls you out on it? Story 53. One of the students in a graduate school seminar I was in was just... maybe dumb isn't the word, but this kid couldn't string 2 words together. We were all mystified at how he even got into the school, let alone the history program. The seminar would mix high-level undergraduates with graduate students, so not everyone was expected to be working on quite the same level, but this was ridiculous. It turned out that he had gotten into the university through some kind of science or engineering program at which he was brilliant, like math scores off the charts, took organic chemistry for fun, 6 times, kind of brilliant, but he didn't want to go into that field. He really loved and wanted to go into history, so he transferred over, and no one thought too much about it because his science grades were so good. The poor kid bombed. He didn't have the vocabulary, syntax, critical thinking skills, analytical skills, creativity, nothing he needed to pass even a basic 101 history course, let alone a graduate-level seminar. The professor pulled me aside and asked me to help him edit his paper before he turned it in. I kept a copy of it because its absolute gibberish was appalling. Everyone felt so bad for him because he wanted so badly to be there, and just didn't have the brainpower to cut it. Last I heard, they had transferred him back to the science department, and he was doing well. I hope he's happy wherever he is. Story 54. Not one particular student, but I've encountered this several times this year, and I don't understand it. In 2 of my music education methods courses, I require students to put together a resource notebook which includes a study guide. This is meant to help them remember the technical aspects of teaching different instruments, for example, woodwinds. They are allowed to use the completed study guide for all quizzes and written exams, but they may not use their textbooks on these tests. I'm essentially giving you a cheat sheet to use. The reason being, writing down the information helps you to retain it, and the test doesn't just regurgitate the study guide, but you have to apply the techniques from the study guide. Each semester, I have about a quarter of the class who refuses to do the study guides. People who do the study guides make a B+ or better, usually an A. People who don't almost invariably fail. It's too much information to try to memorize, so bring the damn study guide and write about how to apply the information. But I guess that's too much trouble. Story 55. I have a ton of plagiarism stories that I could go on for days about. But one takes the entire cake. It finished happening a few semesters ago, so I feel free to talk about him now. Throughout my programming class, I tell the students that they can use outside sources as long as they cite them and understand the code that they are using. This one student, we will call him Junior, had decided that he was going to go to Chegg and pay someone to complete his code for him. Little did he know that I had created a Chegg account and would complete assignments for students, only my own students, and make sure that the code was very obviously mine. One way that I do this is by putting comments at the far right of random lines of code, so far that you'd have to scroll to the right to see them, saying things like, "Code provided by JSMix without consent to submit as an assignment," or something along those lines. Now, most students would find this and then panic and end up writing their own code, not Junior. He submits my code to me as his assignment, so I give him a 0-0 for plagiarism. He doesn't contact me asking how I know he plagiarized. He does this same exact thing on the remaining 5 assignments and final project. At the end of the semester, he turns me into our ethics committee for singling him out and treating him unfairly. It was a very quick decision that I did nothing wrong. I donated all of the money I earned from him to our computer science club, and that the student was clearly at fault. He retook my class 4 more times and failed every time, because of plagiarism. Story 56. One semester, a student missed the final exam with no excuse other than getting the date wrong. They were already not doing great in the course, so with a 0 on the final, they obviously failed the course. It is a required course for their major, so next semester, they showed up again. On the first day of class, I overheard them talking crap about me to nearby students, saying I don't follow the syllabus and schedule exams at random, none of which is true. As the semester goes on, other students ask this student about how to do well on certain projects. The student always responded with, "Well, I didn't actually do that project last semester." Anyways, after missing an exam, and being offered a makeup exam that they failed, this student goes and misses the damn final exam yet again. They showed up to a different section, and when I explained that points would be deducted for taking it late, the student tried to convince me this was their actual section. It wasn't. Story 57. A student I had never seen before who was failing my class suddenly showed up a little less than halfway through the semester. I asked why this was the first time I'd seen her all semester if she was enrolled in my course. She had been going to the wrong classroom for 7 weeks before wondering why the material covered in class wasn't matching up to the online quizzes she kept failing. I was genuinely dumbfounded, but I finally managed to ask which class she had been mistaking for mine for so long. She replied, MA 262, which is Calculus 2. I teach a course about infectious diseases.
Story 58. I had a student submit a formal English essay arranged with a sentence per line, like poetry. It was for a subject called academic writing, which was an in-depth analysis of the history and development of the essay format. We had just spent an entire session on the meaning, use, and structure of paragraphs. When told her paper was currently a fail and she would have to resubmit to pass, she protested that she was British and, I quote, "We don't have paragraphs in England." Story 59. Online student. Had no idea how to read instructions. Was constantly emailing me because she was confused about why she couldn't access certain things in the course shell. I have it set up, so you need to open certain links to unlock discussion boards or drop boxes. All instructions about what they need to click and what they open are laid out on the announcement page. Day 1. 1 week I simply wrote, Daniel Boone reading, rather than putting the chapter number. For 4 years, no one has had a problem looking up the chapter in the table of contents and finding the chapter labeled Daniel Boone. This was too much for her, and she decided she couldn't do that week's work, then got mad when I gave her a 0%. Also was constantly confused about the weekly discussion questions, which I would try to re-explain to her when I would get my weekly "I'm confused" email. There was no language barrier. I think she just wasn't accustomed to open-ended questions that don't have a clear-cut answer. Combined with no eye for detail, and being easily overwhelmed, she tanked. Story 60. Had a kid send me an email. He wanted permission to not take an exam because he was sick. He wrote something to the effect of, "I'm so sick I almost didn't win my boxing match yesterday, and I may not win the one after your exam." Told him he had to take the exam. An hour later, I get a phone call from his mother, asking me why I was being so hard on her son when he is sick. That any other professor would care and show some compassion. I told her that he was too busy boxing to take the exam, told her the story related by her son. She is stunned. Hangs up. An hour after that, I got an email from her saying, "Sorry for bothering you, Dr. Keg6. Please deal with my son however you wish." I'd say trying this as an excuse to skip an exam was pretty dumb, no?
Story 61. I have a lot of absolutely silly stories, but one is popping to mind right now. So, I was a graduate assistant teaching college algebra. It was the day of the final. There was a guy who was in the class at the beginning of the semester and never showed up after the first test, but never dropped the class. I think they got about a 22% on that test, which had an 80% average, while actually writing answers down for all the questions. The worst atrocity on that thing that comes to mind is not being able to write down a single one of the requested 3 measurable properties a laptop could have, besides the given example of price. Another atrocity was somehow solving 2 tie 2, 2 equal sine 0, in a way that yielded 0 correct solutions, and on the same vein having a full page of scribbles trying to solve 2 a plus 5 equals sine 13 by dividing both sides by a. So yeah, that was the next to last time I saw him up until that point. My last office hours before the final, he wanted to come talk to me, and I said, okay, of course, since it's policy. He shows up 40 minutes later than he said he was going to. Lucky for him, I was still hanging around talking to a friend before just leaving. He pretty much proceeded to grill me for what grade he would need on the final to pass. I told him to take out the syllabus. He didn't have it. He couldn't find the email or online version, so I said, okay, doesn't matter. I said there were 2 quizzes, an entry knowledge exam, and 1 test you took, also some homework, and you will take the final. You earned about 100 points from the work you did. The class is out of 1,000 points. The final is out of 200 points. If you get all the points on the final, what percent do you get in the class? He couldn't figure it out, so I told him that it was about 30%. He said, "All right, thank you," and left. I didn't think I would be seeing him again. Well, I did on the day of the final. He was blatantly cheating and had a powerful hempen odor, and I totally ignored it. 1 or 2 students came up to me to tell me he was cheating, and I asked if they ever saw him in class, and they walked away laughing and said, "Have a nice summer." Everyone finished within 1 hour of the allotted 2 besides him, and he took that whole 2 hours, still sitting there cheating. I had to yank it out of his hands once the time was up because I wanted to freaking go home. He says, "Have a nice summer" and all that too, and heads out. I was pretty sure it was the end of everything yet again. Well, after I got the final scores, it was a multiple choice test, and posted them, I was on my way, driving home, listening to one of my favorite albums, and it was at one of those parts that kind of twists your heart based on life events going on and all that, you know what I mean. Right then, my phone starts going off, blasting over my speakers, since I was conveniently using Bluetooth. I answer, and it's him. He somehow got my personal cell number. He got an F on the final he cheated on for double the time, but it was a 50%, so it was good, in his opinion. He asked if he could have a DI instead of an F to not lose his scholarships. I said that I'm not tripling your points in the class and to have a nice summer, hung up, got bombed with so many calls I had to slow down and block him so I could stay sane and also hear my music in bursts longer than 4 seconds. Then my phone starts lighting up with emails. I see all caps about how they are going to be emailing everyone in charge about this, etc. And I just emailed back something along the lines of, "All right," and then blocked the email too, since I think 10 emails in 14 minutes is a bit much. So I just get home, email the coordinator, and tell the story in like 2 sentences, and finally hear nothing again, until he showed up at my house. No, I'm just kidding this time, thank God. Story 62. Not a professor, but was a teaching assistant for a while. For his capstone thesis at the end of the term, which is worth 50% of the course mark, he copied and pasted everything from the internet without sourcing. Not only did he get a 0 in the course, but also permanently damaged his reputation. Story 63. Dumbest plagiarism was a student who copied his friend's work from the previous semester. The answer key was totally different, so not only did he get every single answer wrong, but I knew exactly how, and that he cheated. Plagiarism in general is dumb. Turn in your own crappy work and you probably get a C case. But get caught plagiarizing and you've got a 0 plus other penalties. And most of the time, plagiarized papers don't even correctly address the assignment in the first place. Story 64. More recently, there was the student who forged a doctor's note so that he could make up a test. For some reason, he decided to handwrite the address of the doctor's office that he'd Googled instead of just typing it. As most of you know, doctor's offices typically have a standard, printed letterhead, so this was already suspicious. The handwriting on the note was, of course, exactly the same as the handwriting on the test that he submitted an hour later. If he'd just typed out the contact info, he probably would have gotten away with the forgery. Story 65. A fellow teacher on the staff told me he was giving up on a student who he claimed had a serious bad attitude problem. I took this student in under my wing and discovered, just as I suspected, that it wasn't the student with the bad attitude problem, but the teacher. With some positive support and appropriate guidance, this student became an achiever and well liked by both peers and faculty, except for that one teacher who preferred to berate rather than encourage and inspire.